Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to discuss Stoicism and the INTJ. I chose this topic at the request of a subscriber whom I would like to thank. It has turned out to be a very interesting topic for me. The Hellenistic world was one of great energy. It was moving upward like a rocket heading for space. Great minds were thinking great thoughts. Aristotle was performing science in a way that had not been done before. Mathematics was flourishing. I sometimes like to think about what the future could have been like if that society had continued on that path without taking any detours. They might have colonized the moon in the 1st or 2nd century AD. But that is merely speculation, because even the Byzantine Empire, often called Hellenistic, and Greek was spoken widely in Constantinople, had wandered far from the path that was laid down by the great minds of the 4th century BC. And yet, here we are today, still discussing the ideas of those men and finding value within them. The Stoic school of thought was founded by Zeno around 300 BC, and the mantle of the Socratic school fell unevenly upon 3 different schools, with the lion's share landing squarely on the shoulders of the Stoics. The Epicureans, who with close observation might appear to be quite modern, and their philosophy would have dovetailed nicely into the scientific methodology, were effectively deists. At least the founder Epicurus appeared to be so, with a belief in the gods, but not their interference in our lives. They got a bad rap, being viewed as a promotion of the life of a sot, with wine, women, and song in overabundance. But Epicurus promoted an austere life that would be far more restrained in the pursuit of debauchery than most college campuses are today. The other main school that flowed from the Socratic river was that of the skeptics. They suggested that Socrates really meant it when he said that he knew nothing. Epicurus treated that view with sarcasm, suggesting that if they really knew nothing, they should sit down and shut up. The Stoics were often called Socratic, and they had no problem with that. There were debates about whether there was only one virtue, that of wisdom, and all the other virtues were a subset of that, or there were actually different virtues. But in the end, these philosophers all seemed to wish to understand what is good and right in life and what is evil, what makes a happy or a good life and what does not. The Stoic took the view that it made no sense to whine. What are you complaining about? If you have no control over something, then whining is a complete waste of time. If you do have control over something, then control it. Again, whining is still a waste of time. I see a lot of the thinking side of the INTJ in this system of thought. We look at the world and consider what we can control and what we can never touch, and we consider what we can do to change things for the better. We spend very little time whining to others. We have little sympathy for those who do whine. The incessant obsession of the Greek philosopher with understanding and defining virtue is something that I personally do resonate with. I can embrace fully the idea that without some concept of virtue, civilization itself cannot exist. Stoicism has a quality of being universally accessible. This is something that not all philosophical systems can claim. The Stoic asserts that in the end you can only control yourself, and his highest aim is to do just that. He will encounter others who have other aims, including the evil, the stupid, and the thoughtless, but his role in dealing with them is to teach them when he can, and tolerate them when he can't. This reminds me a great deal of the words of Ebenezer Scrooge when asked to consider the situation of others, and he replied, "It's enough for a man to understand his own business and not to interfere with other people's. Mine occupies me constantly." Stoicism can be embraced by a slave, as with Epictetus, or by an emperor like Marcus Aurelius, and done so equally well. A Stoic accepts life as it comes to him, and it is his job to make the best of the hand he is dealt. All people get sick. Deal with it. All people die. There's no point in fearing or complaining about it. It is a striking contrast when you view King Solomon, ruler of a small land, a collector of wise sayings, and said to have had 1,000 wives and concubines, with the pagan emperor of all the world from the British Isles to Egypt, with absolute power over it all, and he had but one wife, and who is to this day known as the philosopher emperor. other Roman emperors were far more into seeking their own physical pleasures. But this Stoic emperor actually practiced what he believed. He wrote, "The object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane." While their approaches to the questions differed between the schools of philosophy, their aims were usually quite similar. They all sought the good life, the enlightened life, the life that flourishes. Defining what that is exactly and how to achieve it was how they diverged. I think that if you watched, rather than listened to or read, practitioners of these various philosophical systems, you'd find far fewer differences than many realize. Virtue mattered to them, even if they defined it differently. Usually those differences were like splitting a hair into two equal parts lengthwise. Wisdom was universally sought after, however it was defined. Justice was a required part of any virtuous life. Whether you seek tranquility, as was the case with Epicureans, or like the Stoics, you search for a life that is filled with virtuous emotions but devoid of unhealthy ones, in the end you seek inner peace and outer virtuousness. The Stoics divided your emotions, often pointing out a true dichotomy, where unhealthy pleasure over the unimportant in your life is contrasted with healthy joy over that which is virtuous in your life. They set craving or lusting for that which would be better left alone against wishing or desiring the virtuous. Irrational fear over that which may not come or will come but is part of normal life is set against logical caution, where you use your common sense to avoid that which is harmful, whether it harms your body or your mind. However, they viewed pain and suffering as being inherently unhealthy with no opposite good, other than avoidance or negation of it. Stoicism promotes a healthy abhorrence of that which should be avoided and a healthy desire for that which should be pursued. Again, I see a connection to the INTJ mind here. The Stoics sought to use their judgment in embracing or rejecting emotions, not the other way around. They thought about what they should feel, and they strove to feel what they thought. Their worldview was not defined by emotions, but by thinking. They took into account that certain emotions spring forth naturally from events and are not under your control. But what they focused upon was more long-term and a frame of reference for your emotions. When you could get them under your control, or when you could precondition them along desired lines, you then arranged your emotions with your logic, your reason, and an ethical framework. By using reason, the Stoic will rejoice in that which truly is significant and will deprecate emotions attached to that which is not important. One area that divided the Epicureans and the Stoics was that of social responsibilities, such as in politics. The Epicureans felt that the world of politics was a source of pain that could be and should be avoided if at all possible. The Stoics felt it was their responsibility to dive in and face the pain of people so you can make their lives better. While this may make you a better man, the only joy you get out of it might well be your feeling of attaining a virtue, no matter how unpleasant the process of acquiring it might be. Stoicism asserted that you must follow nature, which to them meant in part being involved with the social order of things in a proactive manner. They felt to acquire the benefits of a virtuous life demanded that they jump in and take care of their society. To define what that might entail is a major undertaking. In his book, Meditations, which Marcus Aurelius never intended others to read, he suggested that his life was an obligation to get up in the morning and to do what he had to do. As a man, he had to act like a man, which according to his philosophical system meant to be a good emperor, no matter how unpleasant it might be. As Christianity developed later, it embraced a good deal of Greek thought into its system. You often hear people bemoan the fact that many of the Christian holidays are laced with pagan symbols and traditions, but what they don't seem to realize is to the degree that their very fundamental ideals are often rooted in the philosophical ideas of Plato, Aristotle, Zeno, and even Epicurus. Perhaps a more precise term to use today would be Hellenistic Christianity. One of the truly laudable qualities of Stoicism is that it is not built to play with like a puzzle. It is not intended to be esoteric or quixotic. It was created to be applied to your daily life. They talked about what it takes to be a good man, not in order to entertain their minds, but to create something to be used. They viewed their work more like engineers than scientists. They wanted what they taught and said to be actually executed in the lives of those who embrace Stoicism. Take a step back to Socrates and Plato. The philosophical framework that has been shaped by the great minds of ancient times is durable enough and flexible enough to alter with new knowledge. When Socrates suggested that he didn't know anything, he was showing that he had an open mind that was willing to take in new ideas, new facts, and new relationships between the facts and the way they can be applied to living a life that can be viewed as virtuous. You can view knowing as having your mind set and being unwilling to change, and not knowing as having confidence in ideas, but at the same time accepting the fact that they may need to be altered or even rejected if new information should be found. There were strong Greek opinions, of course, and even persecution at times, but they were not a room full of stuffed shirts looking at their old books and refusing to budge because what is being presented to them doesn't line up with dogma of the past. Something an adherent of Stoicism might do is to develop habits that would condition his mind to face the hard knocks in life. If he is wealthy and things are going well, he can take a day and live as though he had very little. He can live as if he were very poor, and then he would know that he could face this if he had to. He will practice in good weather how to face bad weather, and when foul weather arrives, he will not fear it. A team practices for a big game. Why would a Stoic not practice for a big life test that may be just around the corner? A daily routine of self-evaluation and planning can shape your mind to be able to face tomorrow stoically. An example of this sort of activity that I personally went through was when I was learning karate. I daily would go out on my patio and punch a springy board structure called a makiwara, and I left blood upon the striking surface at first before my knuckles toughened up. I did push-ups on my knuckles on my concrete patio and rotated them 90 degrees back and forth with each iteration. There were many things like that which I did in order to prepare for something I hoped I would never have to face, and I felt far better about myself having prepared, knowing that I was ready. Practice does more than make perfect. It can create peace within you. We are human, and when a bump comes in the road, we naturally react to it. But we don't have to fear it. In fact, we can actually be ready for it, using our thinking to help condition our emotions. There is a danger here for a fragile mind. The Stoic will point out that what makes you furious, rather than merely sad, when bad things happen, is that you have a fantasy you are living in, wherein this thing that has just pushed your button cannot, or at least does not, exist. If you face up to the fact that this thing can exist, prior to it happening, it will not stop it from being unpleasant, but it will prepare your mind and derail your fury at the disappointment caused by this event. But what if you feel so attached to your fantasy world that you can't part with it? Are you ready to face the fact that this universe can take everything you care about in an instant? Or are you committed to the fantasy that this simply cannot and will not happen? Facing the evil that can come can be like having a trap door unexpectedly open under your feet. The reality of this universe directly contemplated is not for the faint of heart. A life disruption might be a relatively small thing, where you are trying to catch a plane and a traffic accident blocks your way. Your fantasy was that the road would be clear and you would have no problem getting to the airport. Or it might be the unexpected loss of a loved one, your business, or your home. Each of us has to weigh this out for himself. Is it more important for you to be at peace today with your fantasy that nothing major will go wrong, and live out your day believing that and simply hoping that nothing does go wrong? Or are you more at peace by knowing that horrible things happen and might happen today, tomorrow, or next week? How much preparation is a good thing, and how little of it might be enough to shove you into a depression so you hate life entirely? This has to be done on a case-by-case basis. The story of Pollyanna is an example of a person who is in a way the reverse of a Stoic. She avoided all the bad in the world by focusing only upon the good. If something bad happened, she put a happy spin on it somehow. It appears as though Stoics are more quiescent, avoiding the extreme highs and lows. If a tedious lecture must be endured, it is endured, and the Stoic moves on, with feathers unruffled. Pollyanna, on the other hand, would find a way to strut with feathers plumed out and on display, pointing out the joy of knowing that the ordeal was over and would not reoccur for a whole week. But when she fell and was paralyzed, she had no defense for that. It crushed her. But what would it have done to her mind if she had approached the loss of her parents and all the bad things she was exposed to in the story with a Stoic point of view? It is something to ponder. Her cheery disposition changed people's lives for the better, truly a virtue. But it didn't prepare her for the disaster that was coming. What if she had prepared her mind for the disaster from the start? Would that be following a greater virtue or a lesser virtue? For if it squashed her cheery outlook and stolen all the good that that outlook produced for the others, could that not be viewed as killing a virtue? What is the virtue that should be sought in the life of Pollyanna? We are left with the question, can any philosophical approach truly cover all the bases? And from that comes the follow-up question, even if it can't cover all the bases, can it cover enough of them to be effective for you? Another personal example I have of practicing techniques that would qualify as being Stoic was when I quit smoking. I had no idea at the time that any form of philosophy would touch upon what I was taught, but today I can see it clearly. I was a 3-pack-a-day smoker for many years, and then my wife and I went to a stop smoking program that was offered by the Navy at Portsmouth Naval Hospital in Virginia. This was early in 1986. What they had us do was to challenge what they called our triggers. There were times when I simply had to have a cigarette. When I had a cup of coffee, I always had a cigarette too. When I finished a meal, I had a cigarette, always. When I was talking on the phone, which is always stressful to me, I smoked. Whenever I was driving, especially in heavy traffic, I smoked like a chimney. There were parts of my life that, in my mind, simply couldn't exist without having a cigarette. I remember when I was in school, there were ashtrays everywhere, in the aisles at supermarkets and department stores, in doctors' waiting rooms, and anywhere where people would have to be present for any length of time at all, there were ashtrays. Some had sand in the top, and others had a lid on the top that would open so you could drop the cigarette in, and then the lid would close automatically. Smoking was a lot easier to do back then, and a whole lot cheaper. In 1974, the year I met my wife, when my ship pulled out to sea, the ship's store opened, and I could buy a carton of Camel cigarettes for $1.50. A carton, not just a pack. You could get a pack in any bar cigarette machine for $0.25, and free matches were handed out everywhere. If someone bummed a smoke, it cost you almost nothing to share one. Now what this quit smoking program did was to take all these events that had smoking attached to them and cut the link. I could not smoke when I was driving in my car. I could pull over and have as many cigarettes as I wanted outside of my car, but not in the car. I couldn't smoke when I was on the phone or when I was drinking coffee. That link was so strong, I actually had to give up coffee for a time when I actually quit smoking. After meals, I couldn't smoke for 15 minutes. And then 30 minutes, and finally for an hour. Bit by bit, I faced these impossible things until they were not impossible any longer. It was incredibly helpful when the time came to give up cigarettes entirely. Facing the impossible when you don't have to is a very powerful technique because you know it isn't forever. When the wait is over, I could have a cigarette. So I could take it. It was hard, yes, but it wasn't impossible. The Stoic takes things that seem very difficult or even impossible and faces them when he doesn't have to, so that when he does have to do it, he will be desensitized to the experience. When I took on the challenge of teaching, I realize now that my reason was one that a Stoic would approve of. I had a fear of interfacing with people. What greater fear could there be for me than to face getting up in front of a classroom of people and teaching them? I didn't have to do this, but I chose to do this in order to condition my mind to tolerate this uncomfortable situation. And it helped. I'm sure that this channel would not exist today if I had not made that choice. But I found, like the Stoic appears to have, that while you can do things through practice that you would not have been able to face otherwise, it does not make you love these things. It only allows you to be at peace as you face them. Marcus Aurelius gave an example of what a Stoic would pray, if he were to pray. Where another man prays, "Grant that I may possess this woman," let your own prayer be, "Grant that I may not lust to possess her." His orientation was to control the one thing in the world that he could control, himself. And that shaped his appeals to the supernatural as well, because he didn't ask for the gods to change the outside world, but rather to change what resided within himself. As emperor, he could have reached out to possess any woman he chose, but he neither did that, nor did he strive in his heart to even dwell on that idea. He would have closed his eyes to a Bathsheba, who was another man's wife. He would have spent his time removing such desires and supplanting them with things he felt were virtuous. For 19 years, he not only wrote like that, he lived his life like that, even when absolute power was in his hands. If only all politicians and men of power lived by his philosophy, imagine how much better the world would be. Stoicism is not a dogmatic system which you embrace out of fear of the gods, or by dictate from men in power. It helps the practitioner to define and understand what is a good life and how to intellectually grasp the virtues one should pursue. It is a collection of ideas that define clearly, but with considerable flexibility, a methodology for facing life in all of its shapes, from the wonderful to the horrible. A Stoic accepts that life is strewn with hardships and prepares his mind and his emotions to face them. At the same time, he does not reject the good things in life, but rather embraces them to the degree that they merit it. The net result is to cut the extremes out of the emotional sine wave, clipping the highs and the lows, so that life becomes more even and less bumpy to the emotions. It feels very INTJ to me, using your thinking to control your emotions. If you enjoyed the video, please click like, and if you haven't subscribed, please do so. I'll see you next time.